Hello everyone. Right, this is a series of videos to do with biological molecules. So this one's going to be on the molecule water. So we're going to look at how it's been bonded together, the hydrogens and the oxygens, the covalent bonds, and how that causes the molecule to be polar, and how those polar properties apply to living organisms, because this isn't chemistry, this is biology as well. So it's a bit of a recap on GCSE chemistry. So if there's our hydrogen and our hydrogen, because we know water is H2O. Oxygen is a group 6 atom, so it's got 6 electrons in the outer shell. So it needs 2 more to make it fully stable, because 8 is what would make it complete. And then hydrogen, because it's only got 1 shell, it needs 2 electrons to complete its outer shell, and it's got 1 at the moment. So if you imagine this is our hydrogen here normally, there's a little electron like that, and oxygen has got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So they can take from each other, and if they take from each other, then they're going to have to share, and this is what we call a covalent bond. So if when the oxygen is taking the electron from the hydrogen is going to try and take from the oxygen as well, and you end up with both of them sharing. So that's 1 pair of electrons being shared. If you look now, because there's 2 here, hydrogen's outer shell is complete now, because they can both move around, and that one's complete. Same with this one. And oxygen is group 6, so you can see those 2 X's there, 1 and 2. Let's just put the other 4 in. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So now overall, oxygen's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So now both sets, all the atoms now, they're all stable. So when they're sharing, they're not sharing evenly. Oxygen's got more protons in its nucleus, so it's able to pull the electrons slightly closer towards its center here. So because of that, those electrons, that they've got a negative charge to them. So if the oxygen is pulling these slightly negatively charged electrons towards itself and away from the hydrogens, then that's going to cause a slight change in charge for the hydrogens. So the hydrogens are going to become slightly positive. Slightly positive, and the oxygen is going to become slightly negative. So we call this, when this happens, we say that this molecule is polar, or it's a dipole. So it's a polar molecule. And this feature here is what gives water so many of its interesting properties. So I'll just do a quick sketch of water in a much simpler way. So there's water there. So these are slightly positive. We say delta positive and delta negative. So because of that, if another water molecule is in close proximity, then it's going to interact with it, because opposites attract. So this slightly positive hydrogen, there's a positive, there's our negative. It's going to form an interaction, and that interaction there, we call this a hydrogen bond. Okay, so, and that can happen, this water molecule can now bond to another one, and so on. So because of this ability for water molecules to interact or stick towards each other, it's going to have quite an impact on some of its properties. So one of them is water's got a high boiling point. So it doesn't boil until 100 degrees Celsius, which means most of the time water is in a liquid state. so that provides a good habitat for fish. It's good for the cytoplasm in our cells, for being able to transport different substances. And then linked to that, it's got a high specific heat capacity. So these two here, and the third one, high latent heat of vaporization, it's all to do with these hydrogen bonds. So high specific heat capacity, what that means is it's really difficult to change the temperature of water. It takes a lot of energy to heat it up by just 1 or 2 degrees Celsius. So that is really useful for fish. They need very little energy. They expend very little energy having to regulate their body temperature, because sea temperatures don't change much. Sea temperatures don't change much. And then even in our bodies, our body has a very high percentage of water. If we decide to walk into a hot environment, it will take a while for our body to heat up, because the water in our body will require a lot of energy to be able to cause a temperature change. So why is it that it's so difficult to heat water up? Well, temperature isn't a measurement of heat energy. Temperature is a measurement of how much particles or molecules are moving. So if you think of these two molecules here, let's just highlight them. Let's put another molecule here as well. There's the hydrogen. Okay. At the moment, it's quite difficult for these water molecules to move much, because they're stuck together with these hydrogen bonds. So in order for these water molecules to move freely, a lot of energy will be required to break many of these hydrogen bonds at the same time. And only once these bonds get broken can the molecules move freely. It's only at that point will temperatures start to rise significantly. So that's a difficult thing to do. Again, same with this one here, high latent heat of vaporization. It's very difficult. So that's based on evaporation. It's very difficult to turn a liquid into a gas, because if we talk about the differences between liquid and gas, that, if we did there's the particles that show a liquid, they're all close together, and then a gas, they're far apart. Well, in order for those water molecules to break away from each other and show a gaseous state, again, these hydrogen bonds are going to need to be broken. So that's really useful for us when we're sweating. If we get very hot, we can secrete sweat, and for that liquid water to vaporize, it's going to take a lot of the temperature from our skin surface with it, as it turns it from a liquid state to a gaseous state. So it's a really efficient way to keep our temperature down by this evaporation. Water also has a really interesting property in that when you cool it below 4 degrees Celsius, it becomes less dense. So that's why you see ice floating. And the reason why ice floats, and the reason why it becomes less dense, is as the temperature drops below 4 degrees Celsius, the way that the hydrogens and the oxygens, how these hydrogen bonds form, they start to separate further apart from each other, and you get these, what we call a tetrahedral formation. And essentially what's happening is it's causing the water molecules to be further apart from each other. And if you ever make particles or molecules move further apart in the same area, that area becomes less dense, and that's why water is floating. So this is really good. It would be, habitat for polar bears. They can move across it. If they're hunting for fish, they can cover a lot of ground very quickly, and they dig a hole into the snow and they stick their hand into the water underneath to get the fish. Also really useful is for fish themselves. If you go to places like cold places like Moscow, where the lakes freeze, well, if this is our lake, and it's a really cold winter, then the top surface is going to freeze. And the good thing about that is, you think, oh, that's really bad for the fish. Well, that top surface provides a really good insulating surface for the fish below, and it actually stops the fish from freezing. It's like a big blanket. It makes it very difficult for the water below to be able to freeze. So that initial freeze of the top surface is keeping the water below in a liquid state. It will take a very, very long, prolonged amount of cold winter for months and months for everything to fully freeze. So this delays that process. Water is also cohesive and adhesive. Again, this is to do with the hydrogen bonds. So cohesive, that's a word we use to describe how water molecules stick to each other. And adhesive is a word used to describe, so I'll just write together. So that's one more. So this would be, this here is showing cohesion, because that's one water molecule sticking to another. And adhesion is when water molecules can stick to other polar surfaces. So if you wash your hands, you'll see that the drips of water still sticking to your skin. But in terms of how it might be helpful for living organisms, if you think of a plant, in transpiration, that's the process where water is moving up the roots, through the xylem, out through the leaves. Well, the reason why transpiration is happening, it's a really bad picture, sorry, there's a leaf. The reason why transpiration is happening is because water is evaporating off the leaf, and that causes a suction. It pulls water into the area where the water's disappeared, where it's evaporated. And any water molecule that gets pulled, because it's cohesive, it's going to pull the water molecule next to it, and it's going to be like a big set of beads all connected. So if this one here gets pulled, then it's going to pull this one, which pulls this one, which pulls this one. It's like they're all holding hands. So that pulling is going to go all the way down to the roots. And also, what's going to help for the water to move up, because water's adhesive, as it's moving up the xylem, the water is going to stick to the surfaces of the xylem. And this ability for water to be cohesive and adhesive gives it a really interesting property where it displays capillary action. Oops, get rid of an L. Capillary action, which is the ability of water to be able to move up a narrow tube against gravity. So it makes it really, if you think of those tall trees, it's amazing that water can get to the top of a tree without any pump required. So cohesion adhesion is helping with capillary action, which is the movement of water against gravity. Again, because of water being cohesive, at the surface of water, there is a very high surface tension. This is going to help organisms like pond skaters. It's a pond skater. And they're just the little insects that can move across the surface of the water without breaking it. So they'll be able to get across a bit quicker, I guess. So that's useful. There's lots of organisms which just are hanging about on the very surface of the water. And then finally, again, because, this isn't the hydrogen bonds themselves, because water is a polar molecule, and polar means it's got a charge, and it's dipole, so it's got a slightly positive and a slightly negative charge. It's able to interact with other polar substances. So, for example, salt, which is NaCl, when salt goes, that's made from sodium and chloride ions. when that salt goes into a beaker of water, then the Na plus is going to break away from the Cl minus, and the Na plus is going to be able to interact with the slightly negative parts of the water molecule, and the Cl minus will be able to interact with the slightly positive parts. So because of that, then it's in an aqueous state. It's dissolved. So salt's gone from being a solid. As soon as it goes into water, it's become aqueous. That's much easier to transport now. So it's also much easier now for these ions to be involved in chemical reactions in the cytoplasm. So it's providing a fantastic medium for chemical reactions and for transporting substances. So that's everything to do with water. So we have to be aware of what the properties are, and it's nearly always the properties are linked to the hydrogen bonds. Okay, so the fact it's hard to break that bond has caused lots of these properties. The one of it being a solvent, this is a property more to do with it being a polar molecule. So we've just talked about it in this last bit with salt. All right, hope that was helpful.